Every country on Earth is in debt. The United States, 38 trillion. Europe, 14. Japan, 9. Even the richest nations on the planet owe more than they own. But here's the question no one asks. If everyone owes money, who is owed? You live inside that system. Your job, your savings, your future. All of it depends on a promise written centuries ago. A promise born not in banks, but in war. When kings ran out of gold, they invented something far more powerful: debt. They turned promises into paper, paper into power, and power into control. Now that same system rules the modern world. Every government, every bank, every citizen, bound by invisible chains of credit. You think you own your money. Look closer. Every dollar you touch is someone else's IOU. Every coin you spend carries a silent debt, and yet the question remains, what happens when the world runs out of belief? Because the global economy doesn't run on gold or oil. It runs on trust. And when that trust breaks, everything collapses. So ask yourself, if the world owes itself, who really pays the price? Every nation on Earth carries a debt. The United States alone owes more than $38 trillion, the largest figure in its history. The European Union holds around 14 trillion. Japan owes nearly 9. Even oil-rich kingdoms like Saudi Arabia and industrial powerhouses like Germany and China are buried under enormous sums. But here's the paradox. If everyone owes money, who is actually owed? This is the hidden world where money, power, and history collide, and nothing is ever as simple as it seems. Debt isn't just a burden, it's the skeleton of modern civilization, the invisible architecture that holds up every war, every crisis, every boom, and every collapse. Follow the trail of creditors long enough, and you'll uncover something deeply unsettling. The world doesn't owe money to anyone in particular. It owes it to itself. But that doesn't mean everyone wins equally. To understand how we reached this moment, a planet drowning in over $315 trillion of debt, nearly 3 times the size of the global economy, we must go back to where it all began. Centuries before credit cards or digital transfers, the concept of national debt was born not on Wall Street, but on the battlefield. In 1694, England was locked in a brutal war with France and running out of gold. Desperate, the king turned to the merchants. In exchange for a steady stream of interest payments guaranteed by future taxes, they agreed to finance his war. To manage this revolutionary system, the Bank of England was born. It was an idea that changed the world. For the first time, a nation could spend money it didn't yet have, and in return, lenders received something of immense value, a government's promise. A promise that could be bought, sold, and traded. That promise became known as the government bond, the seed from which the entire modern financial system grew. France copied the model, the Netherlands perfected it, and across the Atlantic, a newly independent United States adopted it to fund its revolution, and later its expansion westward. Debt was no longer a sign of weakness. It became a badge of power, a symbol of credibility. The ability to borrow was the ability to rule. Empires once conquered land to seize gold. Now, they issued bonds to collect interest. The battlefield had shifted from the soil to the balance sheet. Fast forward 3 centuries, and debt has become humanity's most powerful export. The United States owes $38 trillion, Japan over $9 trillion. And every 100 days, global borrowing swells by another $1 trillion. Every country owes, every bank lends, and every citizen, through taxes, savings, and pensions, plays both roles, debtor and creditor. But who exactly holds the other end of the rope? Let's begin with the United States, because its debt isn't just national, it's global. Of that $38 trillion, about half is publicly held, meaning it's owed to investors rather than other parts of the government. Roughly 2/3 of those investors are American. Banks, pension funds, mutual funds, insurance companies, even the Federal Reserve itself. The remaining 1/3, around $9 trillion, is held overseas. Japan stands as the largest foreign holder, with roughly $1 trillion in U.S. bonds. China follows with around $800 billion. Then come the United Kingdom, Luxembourg, and Belgium. So when people claim that America is in debt to China, they're partly right, but only about 2% of the total debt belongs to China. The truth is, most of America's debt is owed to America itself. The Treasury issues bonds. Banks and funds buy them. The Federal Reserve often buys them back, creating new dollars in the process. Americans pay taxes to fund the interest on those bonds, money that flows back into their own retirement accounts. It's a perfect mirror, a circular system, where the debt is real, but the creditor is a reflection of the same machine. And this loop doesn't stop at America's borders. It stretches across the entire globe. Japan lends to the U.S. through treasuries. The U.S. lends to Europe through the IMF. Europe lends to developing nations through the World Bank. And developing nations, in turn, lend back to richer economies by storing their reserves in Western bonds. It's a planetary game of hot potato, except the potato is made of promises. Every country holds someone else's IOU. Every promise is secured by another promise. Picture a poker table where every player has borrowed chips from the next, and the only rule keeping the game alive is simple: nobody stands up. But there's another layer, the most powerful one of all: the markets themselves. Behind every government bond lies a vast web of institutions: hedge funds, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and central banks, managing tens of trillions in assets. These are the true arbiters of credit. They decide which nations borrow cheaply and which must pay a premium just to survive. When they lose confidence, currencies collapse, governments crumble, and entire economies can be reshaped overnight. Democracy may decide who governs, but markets decide who survives. And at the heart of it all stands the modern high priest of this system, the central bank. Central banks don't just manage debt, they create it. Every time the Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank buys government bonds, it prints new money into existence. One institution's liability becomes another's asset. Every dollar in circulation represents a unit of debt somewhere else. There is no such thing as debt-free money. Every coin, every bill, every digital dollar carries an invisible IOU engraved on its surface. For decades, this fragile loop has survived on a single fuel: confidence. As long as investors believe governments will pay interest, even if never the principal, the machine keeps turning. But when confidence falters, the illusion cracks. We've seen it before. In 2010, Greece's debt became unpayable. Bondholders panicked, yields soared. The European Central Bank and the IMF rushed in to rescue the nation, but the price was brutal: tax hikes, deep spending cuts, and years of mass unemployment. For a generation, the word bailout became another name for sacrifice. Argentina faced the same curse. Decades of defaults turned debt into a national trauma. In Sri Lanka, the crisis came when the government ran out of foreign currency to pay its loans. Gas stations dried up, protests erupted, and a government collapsed. When the system breaks, the hidden creditors suddenly come into view: the IMF, the rating agencies, and the faceless bondholders who hold entire nations by the throat. Yet even after collapse, the cycle begins again. Old debts are restructured, new loans replace the ruined ones, and the machine resets under a new name but the same balance sheet. Because in the 21st century, debt isn't designed to be repaid, it's designed to be renewed. Governments today don't aim to clear their ledgers. They roll them forward, forever. That's not a scandal, it's policy. When you or I take a loan, repayment is expected. But governments treat debt like a subscription, continuously renewed through new bonds that pay off the old ones. Economists call it refinancing. Interest becomes the real product, rent charged for global stability. The entire world economy depends on that rent, like a shark that must keep swimming to breathe. Confidence, not repayment, keeps it alive. The United States will never erase its $38 trillion debt. Japan has been rolling its debt for decades, now exceeding 2.5 times its GDP, and yet its bond yields remain near zero. Investors don't want repayment, they want renewal, because to them, government debt is safety itself. U.S. Treasury bonds aren't liabilities, they're assets, the bedrock of global finance. Banks use them as collateral. Pension funds use them for security. Central banks treat them as money itself. The system depends on governments never paying off their debts, because if they did, the foundation of the modern economy would vanish overnight. Imagine for a moment if Washington decided to pay off every last dollar of its debt. Banks and investment funds around the world would lose their most stable asset. The dollar supply would contract, markets would freeze, and deflation would sweep through the economy. Paying off the debt wouldn't save the system, it would destroy it. So instead, governments do the opposite. They issue more, not recklessly, but rhythmically, a steady pulse that keeps capitalism alive. Debt has become the heartbeat of the modern world, flowing through every mortgage, pension, and market transaction. That's why when politicians speak about balancing the budget or paying down the national debt, they're selling an illusion. The goal isn't to eliminate debt, it's to keep it believable, serviceable, and desirable enough that the system never stops running on faith. Because once that faith disappears, the numbers don't matter anymore. Confidence collapses, interest rates surge, and the economy, built entirely on rolling promises, comes to a halt. That's the hidden truth of sovereign debt. The plan was never to pay it back. The plan is to keep the world believing it will. But belief is unevenly shared. When we say a nation owes it to itself, that's only half the truth. Interest payments don't rise equally across society. They flow upward, from workers and taxpayers to the investors and institutions that own the debt. Debt isn't just an exchange between countries, it's an exchange between classes. The same mechanism that fuels growth also widens the gap. Those who hold the debt prosper. Those who service it struggle. That's why inequality and indebtedness rise together. They're two sides of the same coin. From households to empires, the pattern repeats. Creditors aren't villains. Debtors aren't victims. They're both gears in the same machine. But what happens when the machine runs out of motion? When new borrowing can't sustain the promises made before? That's when the question, "Who is the creditor?" stops being abstract and becomes personal. Because at the top of this global pyramid, there's no single face to blame. It's not China, it's not Wall Street, it's not the IMF, it's all of them, and it's us. The modern financial system has blurred the line between debtor and creditor. Governments issue debt, banks multiply it, investors trade it, and ordinary people depend on it for jobs, pensions, savings, and even stability itself. Debt once meant bondage. Today, it means balance. But if that balance ever breaks, if confidence collapses, the illusion ends. And the world will remember what debt truly is, a promise that cannot last forever. Because in the end, money isn't just numbers, it's trust. And trust, like every empire built upon it, can fall.